It was one of those nights that felt alive, not with peace, but with tension. Rain pounded the hospital windows in rhythmic violence, as if the sky itself was trying to warn us. Inside St. Vincent Medical Center, fluorescent lights flickered. Over the trauma bay floor, each pulse of brightness cutting through the darkness like a heartbeat refusing to die. Then came the sound, that rising, shrill scream of an ambulance siren slicing through the storm. Dr. Michael Reeves, a 29-year-old trauma resident still new enough to feel the weight of every decision, looked up from his chart. It was 2:17 a.m. when the paramedics' voices crackled over the radio. Male, mid-40s, collapsed at a construction site, no pulse, but he's breathing. Reeves frowned, unsure he'd heard correctly. No pulse, but breathing? That wasn't possible. Not in the way medicine understood life. Moments later, the ER doors burst open, letting in a gust of rain and chaos. The gurney rolled through, wheels screeching against the tile. A man lay motionless beneath soaked blankets, his skin pale and waxen, lips tinged blue. Paramedic Jenna Hart shouted over the storm. No palpable pulse, doctor. Unresponsive, but respirations present. We've got agonal movement. Reeves leaned in, pressing his gloved fingers against the man's carotid artery. Nothing. No pulse. But the chest, it rose and fell in shallow, slow breaths. The air in the trauma room thickened. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The monitor showed flat lines where rhythm should be, yet oxygen still moved through this man's lungs. Start. Compressions, Reeves ordered, voice steady, though his mind raced. The team fell into motion. IV lines, oxygen masks, adrenaline. But as the chest compressions began, the strangeness deepened. Daniel Harper, that was his name according to his wallet, began to twitch, as if resisting the pull of death itself. Reeves looked up at the monitors again. Still no heartbeat, no blood pressure, no measurable signs of circulation. And yet, the oxygen saturation, the reading of how much oxygen is in the blood, hovered at 89%. That shouldn't be possible without a functioning heart. He stepped back, staring at the man's face. Daniel's eyes were half open, pupils reactive, but empty. Not in the way of death, but in the way of someone trapped between worlds. How long was he down? Reeves asked. Maybe 7 minutes, one paramedic answered. We were about to call it when he started breathing on his own. That sentence landed like a thunderclap in the room. Breathing. On his own. Reeves knew the protocols. He knew what textbooks said about cardiac arrest, the cascade of organ failure, the strict definitions of life and death. And yet, here lay a man defying every one of them. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper more to himself than anyone else. Hang in there, Daniel. Don't you go yet. For a second, just a second, he thought he saw Daniel's eyelids flutter. The monitors didn't change. The pulse was still absent. But in that moment, Reeves felt something shift in the air, a strange stillness that defied explanation. Later, he would remember that instant with clarity sharper than any scalpel. The rain hammering the glass, the metallic tang of adrenaline in the air, the silence that followed his words. It wasn't medical instinct that made him keep going. It was something older, something human. He had been taught to trust numbers, blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation, but that night, those numbers meant nothing. Reeves didn't know it yet, but this would be the case that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because the man lying before him had no pulse, and yet, somehow, impossibly, he was alive. When Dr. Reeves finally lifted his gaze from Daniel's still body, the thought echoed through him like a prayer. He had no pulse. But when I looked into his eyes, I knew he wasn't gone. Dr. Michael Reeves had spent years preparing for moments like this. The chaos of trauma surgery, the sudden collapse of a stranger, the precise choreography of saving a life in seconds. He had drilled it into himself. Emotions must be locked. Away measured responses must rule over instinct. And above all, the science had to prevail. Life and death were neat equations, predictable patterns, a series of vital signs and numbers. That was the world he knew. And yet, standing over Daniel Harper, Reeves realized with a cold, creeping dread that he had stepped into a case that defied every lesson he had learned. Daniel's story began hours earlier at a downtown construction site. Workers had found him lying motionless among the scaffolding, helmet cracked, blood streaked along his temple. Paramedics arrived to find him without a pulse, unconscious, and yet, inexplicably, still breathing. They had called the hospital immediately, their voices trembling as they reported the impossible. Reeves remembered the words like a mantra, as though saying them aloud might make sense of them. No pulse, but breathing. In the trauma bay, the team worked with methodical urgency. Every movement was rehearsed. Chest compressions, IV lines, oxygen masks, and defibrillator paddles. And yet, Daniel's body continued to defy certainty. His pulse could not be found. Blood pressure could not be measured. His heart, according to every monitor, had ceased. But the shallow, labored breaths persisted. It was as if the body was suspended between the finality of death and the tenuous hold of life. Reeves recalled the moments of quiet in between commands, the almost imperceptible flinch of Daniel's fingers, the faint tightening of his jaw. Every small, inexplicable movement weighed heavily on him. Medicine had rules, algorithms, and protocols, but this man had no pulse, and yet he existed. There was no category for him in the textbooks, no precedent in the case files. For the first time, Reeves felt the fragile boundary between knowledge and mystery slip. Emotion began to seep into his chest, a feeling he had long suppressed in the operating room. Fear, awe, and a creeping disbelief intertwined. He knew the data, understood the science, and yet the reality before him refused explanation. He watched. The nurses and residents around him, all skilled, all trained, all unnerved in equal measure. Even the most experienced attending leaned over Daniel with furrowed brows, whispering, "How is this possible?" It was in these moments that Reeves began to confront something he had never considered. Medicine could save lives, but it could not always explain them. The weight of that truth pressed against him as he instructed the team to continue every intervention, to honor the man's persistence against the void. Daniel Harper was no longer just a patient. He was a living paradox, a question mark in the sterile halls of science. Reeves would later describe the experience as descending into a space where certainty no longer existed, where every heartbeat, or lack thereof, carried the potential to shatter everything he had believed. Watching Daniel defy death, even in small, hesitant ways, forced him to confront the limits of medicine, the fragility of life, and the mysteries that lurked beyond the reach of human understanding. That night, the trauma bay became more than a room for saving lives. It became a threshold, a place where the impossible had begun to make itself known. In the sterile, humming environment of the trauma bay, the impossible seemed to settle around Dr. Reeves like a dense fog. Daniel Harper's body lay before him, an enigma written in pale skin and shallow breaths. To any trained physician, a man without a pulse was clinically dead. The heart, after all, is the engine of life. Without its rhythmic contractions, blood ceases to flow, oxygen-starved organs begin to fail, and consciousness slips away. Yet Daniel's brain was still sending signals. His eyes, though glassy and distant, reacted to light. His chest continued a faint, irregular rise and fall. He existed in defiance of every textbook definition. Reeves tried to reconcile what he saw with what he knew. In moments like this, medicine becomes a language of probabilities, a translation of life into measurable metrics. Pulse absent, flatline on the monitor, blood pressure 0, yet he was breathing. Experts call this phenomenon pseudo-pulseless. Electrical activity, or PEA, a rare situation in which the heart's electrical system fires without producing effective blood flow. Agonal breathing, a reflex often mistaken for life, might explain some movements, but Daniel's case was different. His responses were too deliberate, too coordinated to dismiss as mere reflex. Medical consultants would later pore over the records. Electrocardiograms displayed flickers of activity, subtle spikes, that suggested the heart might be attempting resuscitation, even as the pulse remained undetectable. His oxygen saturation, the percentage of hemoglobin carrying oxygen in the blood, hovered at 89%, higher than expected in someone clinically dead. Even the most experienced cardiologists were unsettled. "It's rare," one murmured, "but not impossible. Still, I've never seen it last this long." The ER monitors painted a ghostly image, flat lines punctuated by faint, wavering spikes, a visual heartbeat that seemed more like a question than an answer. Reeves stared at the screen, feeling the boundaries of science blur. Every measurement screamed one reality, every observation whispered another. The room felt suspended in liminal space where life and death overlapped and certainty dissolved. And yet, the physiological puzzle could not account for the deeper questions that began to rise within him. If a man's heart stops, but his mind remains awake, what does it mean to be alive? Can consciousness persist when the body teeters on the edge of death? Daniel Harper was no longer just a patient. He had become a living experiment in the fragility and resilience of human life. Even as the trauma team continued interventions, chest compressions, medications, defibrillation attempts, the mystery persisted. They were engaged in a battle not just against biological failure, but against the limits of understanding itself. Each shallow breath, each twitch of a finger became a defiance of everything they had been taught. Reeves realized that science, for all its precision, is sometimes forced to stare into the unknown, to confront phenomena that resist categorization, and to accept that some truths are beyond immediate explanation. In that moment, with Daniel Harper lying between life and death, Reeves understood that medicine is not only the study of what can be measured, but also the recognition of what remains unmeasured, unseen, and inexplicable. He would later describe the case as haunting, a reminder that life can persist in ways that defy reason, that consciousness may linger even when the body seems to have surrendered. And in that realization, a deep, unsettling question took root. When does life truly end? if the pulse is gone but awareness remains. Daniel Harper's experience of that night would later be described in fragments, half-whispered, as if even speaking the truth aloud might shatter it. From the outside, the ER was chaos, the metallic clatter of gurneys, the sharp hiss of oxygen, the anxious voices of doctors and nurses orchestrating a frantic ballet of survival. But for Daniel, something else had unfolded. A moment suspended outside the rules of biology, a drifting between worlds where time lost its meaning. He later described rising above the trauma bay, as though lifted by an invisible current, watching the scene below with the strange clarity of someone detached from the body they once inhabited. He saw the lines of IV tubing like silver threads glinting under the fluorescent lights, the tension in the nurses' hands as they worked to sustain a life that seemed beyond reach. He could hear Dr. Reeves whispering over the chaos, a voice threaded with urgency and disbelief. "Don't go yet." The words penetrated him in a way that was both grounding and unreal. The sensation was unlike anything that could be explained scientifically. Daniel recalled a tunnel of light stretching far above, warm and luminous, the edges blurred as if painted in watercolors. He felt a pull, not frightening but profound, drawing him toward a distant warmth, toward voices he instinctively recognized. The soft, distant laughter of his daughter, the comforting tone of his late mother. And yet, in the midst of that pull, he also felt tethered to the room below, to the hands of strangers and the insistence of life clinging stubbornly to his body. For Dr. Reeves, watching Daniel's body in that moment, it was impossible not to sense the gravity of what was happening. The twitching fingers, the shallow respirations, the irregular brain signals, they were more than medical anomalies. Reeves sensed a presence in the room that transcended textbooks, a silent narrative unfolding between the known and the unknowable. He had witnessed near death before, but never had a patient linger so distinctly between life and death. The weight of the impossible pressed on him, a quiet awe that mingled with his professional instinct to act, to save. Narratively, this section is where emotion and mystery intertwine most deeply. Daniel's recollections are haunting and luminous simultaneously. He remembers floating above his own body, seeing details he could not have known. The red pen clipped to Dr. Reeves's pocket, a nurse's trembling, tear-streaked face, the faint strains of a song drifting from a radio near the nurse's station. These observations, later confirmed by the staff, would defy rational explanation. Yet they were undeniably true in his memory, vivid as the pain and fear he felt in that same room moments before. The duality of experience, observing while being observed, drifting while tethered, creates an almost unbearable tension. For viewers, it is the human heartbeat at the center of the documentary, the reminder that patients are more than clinical data, that life and consciousness are layered, and that the moments between life and death are as profound as they are unexplainable. As Daniel finally felt himself returning to his body, the pull of light and warmth receded, replaced by the heavy, mechanical sounds of the ER. He descended into his own flesh, tethered now to Dr. Reeves's voice, the team's relentless care, and the world of the living. And in that return, a silent question lingered in the air. What had truly held him back? What was it that tethered his consciousness, that kept him straddling the line between existence and nothingness? In those precious, suspended minutes, both man and doctor glimpsed something beyond measurement, beyond pulse and blood pressure. A quiet, unsettling reminder that life, in its most fragile form, often refuses definition. And then, everything changed. Back in the trauma bay, the reality of Daniel Harper's condition pressed down on everyone like a physical weight. The monitors still displayed flat lines, the oxygen saturation fluctuating precariously, the ventilator hissed in rhythm with his shallow breaths, and yet his body remained unresponsive in ways that defied all protocol. Every second stretched, each moment heavy with the uncertainty of whether the next would be his last. Dr. Reeves felt the tension in his chest, the pull between hope and fear. As the team moved with deliberate urgency, chest compressions began again, precise and merciless. Reeves counted in his head. 1, 2, 3, forcing his mind to hold rhythm while the chaos of emotions tried to spill over. Each push into Daniel's chest was both a plea and a command to the universe. Stay with us. Fight. The nurses worked around him like dancers in a grim ballet, administering adrenaline, checking lines, swapping pads for the defibrillator, their movements a mechanical chorus, echoing against the bright, sterile walls. Every action was driven by training, yet the air carried a strange, almost sacred tension. The sense that this patient was holding on to life with a will stronger than any physiology could explain. As the team worked, Daniel's body offered small, hesitant responses. Fingers twitched, an eyelid flickered, a shallow cough escaped despite the mechanical support. These faint signs became anchors of hope, each one magnified in importance. Dr. Reeves realized that in those moments, every instinct, every textbook protocol had to be balanced against the raw, inexplicable persistence of the human will to survive. The question became more than medical. When does one stop fighting for a patient whose body seems gone, yet whose life refuses to surrender? Time became elastic. Minutes bled into hours. Reeves recalls leaning over Daniel, whispering reassurances, trying to anchor him to the living. The monitors continued to hum a ghostly rhythm, a liminal score underscoring the struggle. "You're still here," Reeves said quietly. "Oh, you're not done yet." And then, as if responding to that quiet plea, a faint pulse appeared on the monitor. Just a flicker, a single beat, but unmistakable. The team froze, eyes widening, breaths held. The impossible was happening. Life was returning where it had seemed lost. Chest compression slowed, the adrenaline dosages were reassessed, and the team worked with renewed intensity. The ER, which had felt suspended between chaos and quiet, now seemed almost reverent. Each small twitch, each shallow inhale was celebrated silently, as though they were witnessing a miracle unfolding through the lens of medical science. Dr. Reeves, heart pounding, felt a mixture of relief and awe. Here was a man who had defied death, whose body refused the definitions that had once seemed absolute. Yet amidst the triumph, there was also a profound unease. Daniel Harper's survival was a victory, but it was also a reminder of the limits of human understanding. Medicine had tools, techniques, and data, yet these alone could not explain why he had persisted when every metric said he should have been gone. The team had been conduits for life, yes, but they were also witnesses to a phenomenon that transcended clinical reasoning. Finally, as the hours dragged on, Daniel's pulse steadied, his breathing deepened, and the monitors reflected a fragile but undeniable return to life. The room exhaled collectively, relief and exhaustion mingling in the quiet after the storm. Dr. Reeves stepped back, looking at the man who had refused to die, and felt a humbling truth settle over him. Medicine could sustain, could intervene, could restart a heart, but it could not fully explain the persistence of life, nor the mysterious will that sometimes clings to it. After what felt like an eternity, the storm in the trauma bay began to ease. The frantic energy, the urgent beeping of monitors, the hiss of oxygen, all softened into a steady rhythm as if the hospital itself were holding its breath. Daniel Harper's body lay still, but there was a subtle difference now, a quiet pulse threading through the monitors, fragile yet undeniable. Dr. Reeves watched, a knot of tension slowly unwinding, as he waited for the moment that would confirm what they all hoped, that he had survived the impossible. Then, almost imperceptibly, Daniel's eyelids fluttered. The room, previously consumed with clinical focus, seemed to pause. The ventilator hissed, and Reeves leaned closer, sensing the fragile line between consciousness and unconsciousness beginning to blur. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel opened his eyes, and the first words he spoke pierced the room with a clarity that no machine could replicate. "You told me not to go." Silence fell, broken only by the quiet hum of life-sustaining equipment. In that instant, every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every second of uncertainty seemed to converge into a single, breathtaking moment of connection between patient and doctor. He began to speak in fragments at first, then, with growing detail, recounting things he could not have known. The red pen in Reeves's pocket, the nurse wiping tears behind the curtain, the faint strains of a song drifting from the radio. Each revelation was verified by those who had been present, leaving the medical team in a state of stunned disbelief. These details, trivial to some, were profound to Reeves. Proof that Daniel had been conscious in ways that defied the definitions of life they had been taught to trust. For Dr. Reeves, the experience was transformative. He had seen trauma, death, and near-death countless times, yet nothing had prepared him for this. It was no longer about pulse or pressure, oxygen levels or defibrillation. It was about presence, consciousness, and the mysterious persistence of the human spirit. He realized that the man lying before him had not only survived the physical collapse of his body, but had somehow remained tethered to life, aware and observing, despite all scientific expectation. Emotion filled the room quietly, a shared understanding that transcended explanation. Nurses exchanged glances, knowing that this was a story that would linger with them forever. The trauma bay, once a theater of clinical precision, had become a space where life itself revealed its fragile, inexplicable power. Daniel's gaze met Reeves', an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them, a silent, profound recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary together. As sunlight began to filter through the ICU window, illuminating the room in soft warmth, Reeves allowed himself to pause. The hum of machines, once oppressive, now sounded like a gentle affirmation of life. For the first time that night, the weight of impossibility lifted, replaced by awe and reverence. In Daniel Harper's awakening, Reeves glimpsed not only the triumph of medicine, but the limits of understanding, a reminder that life is not always measurable, and consciousness may persist in ways that science has yet to define. Years later, Dr. Michael Reeves would sit quietly in his office, reflecting on the night that had reshaped his understanding of life, death, and the fragile boundary that separates them. He had witnessed countless traumas, countless patients teetering on the edge, but none had left the imprint that Daniel Harper's case had. The memory remained vivid, the rain slashing against the hospital windows, the metallic clang of the gurney, the flatlines that refused to define what it meant to be alive. That night had taught him something impossible to quantify. That medicine is not only a science of precision, but also a practice of humility before the mysteries of existence. He thought of Daniel's eyes opening in the ICU, the whispered words that bridged the gap between life and the unknown, the details that he could not have known yet recalled with clarity. Reeves understood, in a way that went beyond logic, that the human experience of life cannot be measured solely by numbers on a monitor. It is also measured by persistence, by consciousness that sometimes lingers when the body falters, by the unexplainable threads that tether a soul to the world. Reeves's reflections were not only professional, but deeply personal. The case forced him to reconsider the way he approached every patient, every decision, every moment in the trauma bay. He learned to see beyond the metrics, to listen to the subtler signs of human resilience, to recognize the unquantifiable, the will to survive, the moments of awareness, the small but significant details that hint at life continuing in defiance of expectation. In saving Daniel, he realized that medicine is a partnership not just with the body, but with life itself, and all its unpredictability. The documentary closes with archival-style footage of Reeves visiting Daniel years later. Daniel is alive, surrounded by family, quietly living the ordinary life that follows extraordinary survival. The two men shake hands, a simple gesture carrying the weight of their shared experience. No words are necessary. The gratitude, awe, and recognition of something beyond understanding pass silently between them. Reeves watches Daniel interact with his children, the pulse of life evident in every gesture, and is reminded that the moments they shared in the ER were as fragile and fleeting as they were profound. As the narration draws to a close, Reeves's voice carries a lingering question. Medicine can restart a heart, but perhaps something greater decides when it truly stops. The hum of a heart monitor fades into silence, leaving viewers with a quiet, haunting space in which to reflect. Life, death, and consciousness are not always aligned with the pulse, the pressure, or the numbers we measure. Sometimes survival is a matter of something beyond science, something human, something unknowable, something that lingers when the world expects it to end. In the end, Daniel Harper's case did more than challenge medical understanding. It transformed the way Dr. Reeves viewed every patient, every life, and the thin, mysterious line that separates the living from the departed. It is a reminder that some pulses cannot be measured, and some lives cannot be contained by definition. And in that, there is a haunting, lasting beauty,